Hello, Church. Julica here, your Director of Liberation and Transformation Ministries, re-recording my message from Sunday because apparently we had some technical difficulties. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that that did not work. And so we wanted to make sure that you had access to the message. And because I was preaching extemporaneously, I don't have notes to just share that you could read it. So I'm going to do it again, and it'll be a little bit different. Oh, a bug just flew on me. Wonderful. Because I'm outside in my backyard because it was quieter outside than inside. And we'll see if that continues to be the case or not. So thank you for your grace as we engage this. What you need to know before I launch into the message that I shared on Sunday is that during the Story for All Ages on Sunday, we retold the Star Wars story, and we co-creatively told it again and the highlights of it, and it was silly and fun. And then at the end of the story, I asked some questions around what's really good about this story and where is this story lacking a little. And so some of the final things that I raised was, what's up with the hero thing of the two white dudes getting the medals? Why doesn't Chewbacca get a medal? Why are we focusing the way that we're focusing on winning and on the heroic aspect of the quest? So that happened previous to this message, and I'm going to reference it again. So that's why I wanted to say that before I launch into the message itself. Here we go. One of my favorite moments from last Sunday when we were together at Minnehaha Falls was when Amy led us through the process of being and stopping the wave. So some of you might remember that we were doing like the wave that we do at sports arenas or at concerts, like where people take turns going up and down, and it just ripples. But then Amy said, what if it's a wave of ignorance? Do we want to continue that wave? No, we do not. So then she started a wave at one end of the congregation, and everyone started going wave, wave, wave. And then right around the middle, people said no. And they stopped, and they used their arms and their bodies to say no in a very powerful, embodied way. And that was really helpful and excellent for me. I love doing embodied things because it's different for me when I can feel in my gut what something feels like, as opposed to just analyze it or think about it in my head. It's a different level of understanding that I find very, very valuable. And one of the things that I understood is that if you want to stop a wave, you better not be alone. Because what happens when you try to stop a wave on your own? Well, of course, you just get completely blown over. Like, it just doesn't work. In order to stop something large, you need something large to oppose it, right? So it's a really excellent metaphor for organizing and for change, because we can't stop injustice alone. We can't stop racism alone. We can't stop trans antagonism alone. Like that, those are things that are not a single person's work to do. And our white, capitalist, heteropatriarchal, cisgender, ableist culture would have us believe that it's our singular job to do it. And that if we're not doing it right, there's something wrong with us. Because we have been sold stories of single heroes defeating evil empires over and over again. And it is not helpful to have these stories. It is not helpful to have these standards, because we are not Luke Skywalker. We are not going to single-handedly blow up the Death Star. And not only are these heroic stories inaccurate, in the sense that that is not how we defeat evil, that is not how we make social change, they're also damaging, because they set up these really intense, impossible standards. And then when we don't meet those standards, we're demoralized, we're defeated, we're discontented with our lives, we're not well. Because, of course, when something feels impossible, why would you even try? Like, why would you? Now, I will be the first to admit that it's really hard to give up the hero story. Hero stories are fun. I personally love them. I love Star Wars. I love Harry Potter. I do not love J.K. Rowling, but I do love Harry Potter. I love The Lord of the Rings. I love Marvel. I love the X-Men. I love them all. I love a good and evil clarity. Like I love it when it's clear that good is winning. I love a good quest. I love the feeling of winning itself, that feeling of triumph. It's important and it feels good. It's powerful for me to recognize that I have been programmed to believe goodness looks only one particular way. I learned to put more words to that when I read a book called A Feminist Ethic of Risk by Dr. Sharon Welch in seminary. And I want to tell you a little bit more about it. And I want to, which is really funny, that I said this last Sunday, not knowing that I was actually going to have this conversation with you again 2 days later, but this is a conversation that will repeat, not only because we're having technical difficulties, but because this is a paradigm shift conversation. It's a really fundamental way that our organizations hold our purpose and our mission. And so when we look at our ethical underpinnings, we need to do it over and over again because it's a big shift. It's very powerful. We talked about it in Anti-Racism in the Park for those of you who attended it, and we're going to revisit it more than once. So please lean into the repetition of it. Please lean into that. Let's begin by talking about ethics. Ethics is the study of what is good and moral. Ethicists, hard word to say, ethicists like Sharon Welch are interested in understanding how we define what is good and right and how we should behave. And what Dr. Welch does is she compares the ethic of control, which is a white middle-class way of defining goodness, with the ethic of risk, which she distills from the writings of African-American women in particular, and some African-American men and some liberation theologists. So she's comparing these two ethics, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of them and then how I think that applies to our work in this congregation. On the one hand, the ethic of control is about believing that your goodness, your moral self, is determined by your capacity to control the outcome of your actions. When you can control the outcome of your actions, that makes you a good person. So it's all about being able to influence and impact whatever it is that you think is important. And that's sort of the basic heroic frame. If you're going to be good, you're going to be a hero. The problem is that ableism and racism and trans-antagonism and all these other forms of oppression are too big. And what happens for middle and upper class white people and for people of color who have internalized this ethic is that when you realize the problem of oppression is too big and it's too complex to fight alone, you fall into what Sharon Welch calls a cultured despair. Cultured despair is when you know more and more, but you do less and less. You analyze more, but you are not able to choose what's next or see yourself in action. And that makes sense. As I was saying earlier, if we know that something's impossible, why would we even try? Why would we bother? Why would we try to stand in front of a huge wave just to be bowled over? Of course not. So the key is to redefine, how do I know that I'm good? How do I know that I'm doing my part? This is where we lean into the ethic of risk. For those of us who have grown up in the global majority and in other marginalized cultures that have internalized the ethic of control, our job is to remember what we've already been taught. That we need all of us to make it, that we do things with and for each other. So the definition of the ethic of risk is that it has 3 elements. It is a redefinition of responsible action, grounded in community, that requires strategic risk-taking. So responsible action is when we are engaging the next thing in a larger context and with an awareness of the impact of our actions and our choices. So then that's also obviously the strategic and the community piece built right in there. We can't just throw on a cape and go off to rescue whatever it is because we saw something that upset us or that something needs doing. There are plenty of things that need doing, and there are plenty of things that will propel us into action. When we are operating from an ethic of risk, we are taking responsible action and we're strategic, because we also know that we can't do all of it and we can't spread ourselves too thin. So we strategize together in these communities, who's doing what, who's on shift for the resistance, who's going to engage and who's going to tap out and take a break and do some self-care so that you can come back and do it again. So it's a collective process, and one in which we are engaging at a different level that doesn't put all of the responsibility and weight on each one of us. How do I know that I'm part of the Rebel Alliance and that I'm doing my part? How do I know that I'm good? Not because everything turns out the way that I planned, because I show up. I belong to a community like this one, like First Universalist. I'm deliberate and full of care when I choose which risks I'm going to take. I'm willing to try new things, even if I don't know if they're going to work. I will be experimental. I'll be curious. I'll be creative. I'll be willing. Sometimes the tech won't work. It'll be hard and frustrating. And why are things not the way that I expected? Yes. Especially when we do things differently, some things will fail. And it's good for us to practice. How do we respond to the experiments that do not go well? And how do we respond to the ones that do, right? How do we use our covenant and our way of being in right relationship to make sure that we are living into the agreement of how we want to be and what we value? When we remember to focus on our values and our covenant as we engage in all of this work, then we are in better and deeper right relationship. And when things go wrong, we hold each other with grace and care. We become more inclusive as a community. We are radically welcoming. We are able to support change in the larger community, and we are part of the journey of creating safety and freedom for all. So it's a fractal piece. Like, we do it here, we do it in larger places, we do it over there, it impacts how we do it over here. It's really great. As I bring this message to a close, I want to share a passage of Sharon Welch's writing with you. The ethic of risk takes us far from the comfortable prayer of Reinhold Niebuhr. That prayer reads, "God grant me the courage to change what I can, the serenity to accept what I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference." It's a pretty familiar prayer. Dr. Welch says, "The drive of moral life is that we can never know the difference between that which we can change and that which we cannot. Our challenge is to move creatively in a very different sort of adventure, one whose prayer is more like this: what improbable task with which unpredictable results shall we undertake today? What improbable task with which unpredictable results shall we undertake today? In trading an ethic of control for an ethic of risk and then living out this ethos, we can neither undo the past nor control the future. But we can learn from the past, and we can move creatively, responsively, and compassionately in the present." Amen. I mean, that is the thing. That is how we are all empowered, by leaning into this ethic of risk. And so I invite us into that ethic. I invite us into a space of creativity, of willingness, of curiosity, of experimenting with deliberate care. I invite those of us who were raised with it to remember it and to lean into that memory, to free ourselves from the way that we have internalized white body supremacy culture and we have internalized this way of being. And I invite those of us who have trained to work hard and well in order to control the outcome of our actions to release it. Let's release this ethic of control. Let's release a definition of goodness that is too narrow for this community. Let's try new things together. Let's take risks together. Let's learn together. Let's learn it here so that we can then come back when we make mistakes and change things and grow stronger in our capacity to do this work. And as we learn it here, we can then go and apply it to all the other places in our lives that need this ministry. May it be so.